Lamed Ches Amud Aleph. We're at the Mishnah. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Yom Tov hasamach l'Shabbos, bein mila faneha ubein mila achareha. All right, so we have a configuration of Yom Tov and Shabbos. Either Yom Tov is on Friday or Yom Tov is on Sunday, but they're contiguous days. Most of the examples that we're going to see today are where Yom Tov is on Friday. So we're just going to use that example for simplicity to keep it, to keep it just understandable. So Ma'arev Adam Shnei Eruvin, Va'omer Eruve Barishon LeMizrach, Uvasheni LeMa'arav. A person has a right, according to this Tana, to make two Eruvs. Let's say on Friday he wants to be able to travel to the east, and on Shabbos he wants to be able to travel to the west. He wants to extend his boundary to the west. He has every right to do so, and the principle being is that Yom Tov and Shabbos are considered to be Shtei Kedushos. They're two distinct days, so you can make one Eruv for the Yom Tov day, for the Yom Tov boundaries, and a separate Eruv for the Shabbos boundaries. It seems pretty straightforward, right? But we're going to see it's not that simple. You can say Barishon L'Marav V'Shein L'Mizrach. You can do vice versa. You can do the first day Yom Tov for the west, and the second day Shabbos for the east. You can say Eruve Barishon V'Sheni Kivnei Iri, Eruve B'Sheni Uvarishon Kivnei Iri. Or you have another option. Let's say on one of the 2 days you don't want to extend your boundary at all, but you would rather stay like the boundaries of the rest of the members of the city. Now remember, if I extend my boundary by 2,000 amas in the east, then I lose those 2,000 amas in the west. Whereas whatever you shift over in one direction, you lose in the other direction. So a person might want to say to himself, you know what, on Yom Tov I have someone that I want to visit who's 4,000 amas away in the east. So I'm going to go and I'll visit him. But on Shabbos, I have a friend who lives 1,000 amas to the west, and I don't want to lose the opportunity to visit him. So therefore, I only want the Eruv to work on Friday. I don't want it to work on Shabbos. That you also have the option to do, or vice versa, that you could have the Eruv work just on the first day and not on the second day. Or just on the second day, not on the first day. So that's all according to Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer says it's clearly Shtei Kedushos, there's nothing to talk about. V'chachamim omrim, the Chachamim disagree, and they say, O ma'ariv l'ruach echas, o eno ma'ariv kol ikar. O ma'ariv l'shnei yomim, o eno ma'ariv kol ikar. They say two statements which really are the same thing. And they say, you can only make an Eruv in one direction, or you make no Eruv at all. You can only make an Eruv for both days, or you make no Eruv at all. Now really, they should have combined this statement and said it as one statement. You can only make an Eruv for both days in one direction, period. And why? The reason is because it seems like the Chachamim hold that Yom Tov and Shabbos are Kedusha Echas. And whatever boundaries you set for yourself on Erev Yom Tov Bein Hashemashos have to apply for both days, both Yom Tov and Shabbos. That's the simple understanding. Let's go weiter. So Kate said Yaseh. So now this is really a continuation of the Chachamim. Now, one of the things that you would gain if you hold its Kedusha Echas is what? That you'd only have to put an Eruv on Thursday afternoon or Thursday evening, Bein Hashmashos, and then even if the Eruv would get eaten Thursday night, you would still be covered for both Yom Tov and Shabbos because it's Kedusha Echas. But that's not what we see in ensuing lines. Kate said Yaseh, so what should you do? Molicho barishon umachshich alav v'nolo ubalo. That on Thursday evening, you should take the first Eruv, place it, have the Shaliach place it in the place where you want to be Konesh Visa, have it remain there for Bein Hashmashos, and then afterwards you can have the Shaliach take the food home. The reason why you would want to take it home is because if you leave it there, it may get eaten and won't be there on Friday afternoon. Basheni machshav alav ba'ochlo ubalo. On Friday afternoon, you can bring the food back, place it down, and then you'll acquire the Eruv, you'll acquire Shavisa for Shabbos as well. V'nimsa mistaker b'halichaso u'mistaker be'eruvo. In this way, you get to expand your boundaries in the direction that you want it to go, and you also get to have your food, because by leaving it there the entire time, you're taking the risk that someone's going to eat it. Now, the question, and then it says, Nechal barishon eruva l'rishon, then eruva l'sheni. And if it gets eaten after Thursday night, which is the Yontif day, if by Friday morning the food is gone, then you only have that extension of your tchum for Yontif, but it doesn't work for Shabbos, and you get stuck, and you have to go back to the normal tchum for Shabbos. So Amar Lahen Rabbi Eliezer, Modim Atem Li Shein Shtei Kedushos. Rabbi Eliezer says, you guys don't make any sense. If you're holding that Yom Tov and Shabbos are one Kedusha, which is why you're limited to only making one Eruv for both days, then you should only be required to make one Eruv for both days. Fine, I understand the Chumrah that you can't go east one day and west the other day, but there should also be a Kula, which is that you should only have to make an Eruv on Thursday night, and that should cover both Friday and Shabbos. So why is it that you are both machmir on both sides? It doesn't make any sense. So the Gemara is going to explain the svara of the Chachamim. It's going to also explain the language that the Chachamim use. Now, l'ruach echas mainihu l'shnei yamim. L'shnei yamim mainihu l'ruach echas. So the Gemara says, I don't understand the two statements of the Chachamim. The first thing that they said was that you can only make an Eruv in one direction, or not make an Eruv at all. The second thing they said, you can only make an Eruv for both days, or not make an Eruv at all. So what do they mean? When they said you can only make an Eruv for one direction, they mean one direction for both days, both Yontif and Shabbos. And when they said you can only make an Eruv for both days, meaning only in one direction can you make an Eruv for both days. So why did they make two separate statements when the two statements are really the same statement? Hainu kamaisa, that's the first thing. So hachi ka'amri le Rabbanan le Rabbi Eliezer. So what the Chachamim were essentially saying to Rabbi Eliezer, and really what the Mishnah is using, is a shorthand form of really a much more detailed debate between the Chachamim and Rabbi Eliezer. And that's what's being alluded to by the fact that the Mishnah makes it two statements when it's really one statement, because they're really making multiple arguments, as the Gemara is going to explain as follows. The Chachamim first say to Rabbi Eliezer, don't you agree, Rabbi Eliezer, that on a regular Shabbos you can't make two Eruvs, one for the east and one for the west, and you say that for the first 12 hours, for the first half of the day, I want my Eruv to go to the west or the east, and the second half of the day I want it to go to the west. Don't you agree that that's not doable? So Amar Lahen Avol. He said to them, yes, that's true. Emes. The word Avol means here, it means Emes. Yes, true. So they say to him, Kishem shein ma'arvin liyom echad chetzi l'darm v'chetzi l'tzafon kachein ma'arvin l'shnei yamim yom echad l'mizrach v'yom echad l'ma'arav. Well, just like you can't have an Eruv for half a day in one direction and the other half a day in the other direction, you also can't have two Eruvs, one for the first day of Kedusha for Yontif, and the other one for Shabbos, because it's like all one long day. So the Rabbi Eliezer, Hasam Kedusha Echas, Hacha Beis Kedushos. And Rabbi Eliezer's response to that argument is, well, it's a very simple distinction. One day is one holy day. It's one unit of holiness. Here we're dealing with two distinct units of holiness. One is Yom Tov and one is Shabbos, and therefore you can make one Eruv for Yom Tov and a completely separate Eruv, a separately defined Tchum for Shabbos. So Amar Lahen Rabbi Eliezer. So now Rabbi Eliezer comes to the Chachamim now. This is all implicit in our Mishnah. Rabbi Eliezer says to the Chachamim, I atem modim shem irev beraglov biyom rishon ma'aret beraglov biyom sheni ne'achal eruvo biyom rishon and yoselov biyom sheni? Question mark. So Rabbi Eliezer says to the Chachamim. Now remember, just to remind you of the halacha, there are two ways to create an Eruv of being Kona Shvisa. The more conventional way is putting down a food parcel and having it remain there, either via shliach or going there earlier in the day, and having it remain there all of Bein Hashmashos. The other way to be Kona Shvisa is without using food. Let's say you don't have food available. So what do? You walk to the place where you want to be Kona Shvisa, and you stay there the entire Bein Hashmashos. That's how you're Kona Shvisa. So that's what's called being Ma'arev Baraglov, making an Eruv with your feet. So you can either make Eruv with food or make an Eruv with your feet. So the Rabbi Eliezer says to them, don't you agree that if you made an Eruv on Thursday evening by staying there Bein Hashmashos, then you have to repeat the process on Friday afternoon? Don't you agree to that? And don't you agree that if a person put down a food parcel for an Eruv and it got eaten after Thursday night, that it won't work for him for Shabbos, and you'd have to replace it with another parcel of food? So Amru Lo Avol. And they said to him, Emes, yeah, we agree to that. So Hale Ayi. So Rabbi Eliezer says back to them, so that thing indeed is the very argument that I'm making. Beis Kedusha saying that you see from here, the fact that you have to put down 2 Eruvin is a proof that it's 2 separate holy days, because if it was only 1 holy day, you would only need 1 Eruv to cover both days. So the Gemara answers, V'Rabbanan sefuke mesafgalahu, v'hachal chumra, v'hachal chumra. So how do we explain the Chachamim? Really, the Chachamim are misupak. They're not really sure whether Yom Tov going into Shabbos counts as 1 holy day, it's 1 unit of holiness, or whether it's 2 units of holiness. And therefore they're machmir on both sides. They say on the possibility that it's only 1 unit of holiness, so we only allow you to make an Eruv in 1 direction and you can't shift midstream. On the tzad, on the possibility that it's 2 holy days, we require you to make 2 Eruvs, 1 on Thursday evening and 1 on Friday evening. Okay, so that really explains the sheet of the Chachamim. They're machmir.
They would both be in the same place.
They would have to both be in the same place precisely because on the Chumrah of Kedusha Echas. That's exactly right. So Amrlo Rebbe Eliezer. So now the Chachamim continue their argumentation. How can you, Rebbe Eliezer, say that they have the status of 2 Kedushos? Don't you agree that you're not allowed to create an Eruv on Yom Tov for Shabbos? And the understanding is that let's say a person did not create an Eruv on Erev Yom Tov. On Yom Tov is Friday. He didn't create an Eruv Thursday, and he just wants to create an Eruv on Friday afternoon going into Shabbos for Shabbos. So don't you agree that that's illegal? So isn't that a proof to us, to our point, that it's like creating an Eruv in the middle of the day, in the middle of Shabbos, because it's 1 unit of holiness, and that's why it doesn't work. So Amar Lahen Aval. He says, I agree, but that's emes. So Hale Ayi Kedusha Echasi. So doesn't that prove that it's 1 Kedusha, and that's why you can't start making an Eruv just on Friday when Friday is Yom Tov? So for Rabbi Eliezer, no. Rabbi Eliezer will tell you that's not the reason why you're not allowed to do it. Hasa Mishom Hachana. The reason why it doesn't work is not because you're making an Eruv in the middle of 1 unit of 1 Kedusha, but rather because there's a chisaron, there's a deficiency in Hachana. As we're going to see, that in order to prepare properly for Shabbos, the preparation must take place on a weekday, on a day of Chol. Here, the preparation of the Eruv is taking place on a day that is not Chol, that it's a Yom Tov, and therefore, as a result, the Eruv doesn't work.
Can't make an Eruv Tavshilin.
So the whole idea of an Eruv Tavshilin is related to this discussion, but I don't want it to confuse us. Tosfos discusses it.
According to that, how could you previously say you go on Friday to redo the Eruv?
Because you already started it. You already started doing it on Thursday, so we view this as a continuation of your action. This is a continuation of your action that you started on Thursday. Okay, Tana Rabbana. So let's go back to that brayso that we saw a moment ago. Irev baraglav biyom rishon ma'arif baraglav biyom sheni nechal eruva biyom rishon and Yosef biyom sheni divrei Rabbi. So Rabbi is of the opinion that the Eruv that you made Thursday afternoon does not help for the Eruv that you need to make Friday afternoon. So therefore, if you made an Eruv with your feet Thursday, you have to go back to that same spot on Friday to repeat the process. And if you made an Eruv with food and the food got eaten Thursday night or Friday, it will not help for an Eruv Tchumen for Shabbos. So Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda disagrees, and he says, Raizel Chamer Gamel. And he says, no, I hold that it's actually, you're stuck. Chamer Gamel is like from the words Chamor and Gamal. It's a donkey and a camel. What you have to imagine is a donkey and a camel tethered together, and they're pulling away in 2 directions, in opposite directions, and they can't go, they get stuck, they can't move at all. And so what that means, Chamer Gamel, is you got a catch-22, you're squeezed in on both sides. What Rabbi Yehuda is essentially saying is that you have to give the person the chumrah of there being only 1 kedusha, which means that if he made the Eruv on Thursday and he extended his boundary to the east, let's say, he extended his boundary 2,000 amos to the east. So remember, if you extend it by 2,000 amos in the east, you lose 2,000 amos in the west. Remember? Now, if the Eruv gets lost and you no longer have that food, So you could argue, well, then let him go back to being like a regular city person who has 2,000 amas in all directions. No, says Rebbe Yehuda, because on the side that the Erev is a good Erev for both days, so then you've lost your boundary in the west 2,000 amas, and you've extended it 2,000 amas in the east. And on the side that it's 2 Kedushos, then this Erev does not work for Shabbos. So it turns out that we give you the chumras of having the extended Erev in the west, l'chumra, so that you lose your 2,000 amas in the east, plus you lose your extra 2,000 amas in the west because maybe you need a second Erev. So basically we give you the chumras in both cases, which is really what we said that Chachamim hold in our Mishnah, that we give you the chumras of both. Okay, and now the first position is the position of Rebbe. And Rebbe says it's for sure shtei kedushos. Then we have the position of Rebbe Yehuda, who says, I'm not sure whether it's kedusha achas or shtei kedushos. And now we have the third opinion, which we haven't yet seen, which is Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel and Rabbi Yishmael ben Oshel, Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka. These two sages say, Omrim irev baraglav barishon ein ma'arav baraglav b'sheni, nechal eruva b'yom rishon yotzei elav b'sheni. They say, no, we definitively say that it's Kedusha Echas, that it's one holy unit, and therefore if you made an Eruv on the first day, Thursday evening, you don't need to make an Eruv, so therefore you don't need to walk out on Friday afternoon to that same place, and you don't need to put another parcel of food in the event that it gets eaten after Thursday night. It's fine, it's Kedusha Echas for sure, and if there's no Eruv Friday afternoon there, the one that you made Thursday night covers both Yom Tov and Shabbos. So comes along Rav, and he makes a bizarre statement. Amar Rav, halacha kedalet zekenim halalu va'aliba de Rebbe Eliezer da Amar Beis Kedusho say. That Rav says the halacha is like the following 4 sages that I will enumerate in just a moment, who all go according to Rebbe Eliezer, who says that Yom Tov and Shabbos have the status of 2 separate units of holiness. Now, ve'eluhin dalet zekenim, and these 4 sages are Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, the Rabbi Yishmael ben Oshel, Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka, that's 2. The Rabbi Eliezer, the Rabbi Shimon is 3. The Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda, Stima Sa'a. And the 4th one is Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda, who is known as the Stima Sa'a, which Rashi explains means that quite often when Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi would write the Mishnayos, he would write an opinion without attribution, and that was going like Rabbi Yossi because he felt like the halacha was like Rabbi Yossi in most situations. Be'ika da Amri, others learn that Chad Minayu Rebbe El Azar Umapik Rebbe Yossi Bar Yehuda Stimasa. Some say that the 4 elders were not what we just mentioned. They were the first 3, but instead of Rebbe Yossi Bar Rebbe Yehuda, it was Rebbe Elazar ben Shamua. He was the 4th one. Okay, but the point is that Rav now says something very bizarre. He says Rabbi Shimon Gamliel and Rabbi Yishmael hold that it's really 2 Kedushos, when we just got through saying a moment ago that they hold definitively that it's only 1 Kedusha. So that's the Gemara's question. V'hara ben Shimon ben Gamliel v'Rabbi Yishmael ben Oshel Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka ipcha shaminan lahu. Don't they say just the opposite? They said that it's definitively 1 Kedusha. All you need is the Erev on Thursday night, and that covers both days. So Eipoch. So the Gemara says you have to switch it. Just the opposite. They say that you need an Erev on both days because it's 2 Kedushos. Ihachi hainu Rebbe. Well, if that's the case, then they're going like Rebbe. So then what, Rebbe says the very same thing. So why do you have to add them? You should have put them all together. Answers the Gemara, Ema v'chein amar Reb Shimon ben Gamliel v'chulei. So the Gemara says what you have to modify the Brisa is that just like Rebbe held that it's 2 Kedushos, so too did Reb Shimon ben Gamliel and Rabbi Yishmael also say that it's shtei Kedushos. Correct the Gemara v'lichshov nami Rebbe. Well then if that's the case, well then why, let me ask you another question. Why, when Rav is listing the 4 sages that hold that it's shtei Kedushos, doesn't he enumerate Rebbe as being one of the 4? It should be really 5. There are 5 sages, the 4 that he mentioned, plus Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, who also says it's shtei Kedushos. Answers the Gemara, Rebbe Tani la v'lo savarla, Rabbanan, Rebbe Tani la v'lo savarla. Answers the Gemara because Rebbe taught that shita, but he himself personally didn't hold of it. Rebbe didn't hold that it was definitively shtei Kedushos. right? He was citing it, but he himself didn't hold of it. So frek the Gemara, Rabbana nami tani la velo savri la. Well, then how do you know that the Rabbi Shimon Gamliel and Rabbi Shmuel held of that sheet? And maybe maybe they too were just citing it, but they personally didn't hold of it. How do you know this, Rav? The Gemara answers, Rav Gemara Gomerla. Rav had a Mesoira. In other words, yes, it's true. You have no indication from the text of the Brisa that Rebbe is citing it and doesn't hold of it. And Rabbi Shimon Gamliel and Rabbi Shmuel both cite it and hold of it. But Rav had a Mesorah that from his Rebbe that's the way that Tanoim held. The Gemara now tells us, Kinach nafshe de Rav Huna, ayel Rav Chizda lamirma de Rabba de Rav. When Rav Huna passed away, and I believe the reason why we're discussing Rav Huna's Petira is because normally when there was a stira in Rav, you would go to Rav Huna, because Rav Huna was the key disciple of Rav. So if you had a stira in Rav, you'd go to Rav Huna. But unfortunately, Rav Huna had passed away. So Rav Chizda had a stira, and he didn't have anyone to go to ask. So he asked the following question, I guess in the base medrash, and he said, Mi Omer Rav, halacha kedalat zekenim, v'aliba de Rebbe Eliezer, damashtei kedusha, saying, since when, how could Rav possibly say that Yom Tov and Shabbos are two distinct units of kedusha? The ha'itmar, wasn't Rav cited as saying that Shabbos the Yom Tov, Rav Omar nolda bazeh asura bazeh? Didn't Rav say that if an egg is laid on a Yom Tov going into a Shabbos, when Yom Tov is on Friday, if the egg is laid on Friday, the egg is muktzah on Shabbos as well? Now, I can understand. Now, we're going to learn all about this in Maseches BAYT, which is all about eggs being laid on Yom Tov and Shabbos, right? But Rav had said that if it's laid on Yom Tov, it's going to be muktzah on Shabbos as well. The only reason that should be true is if it's kedusha echas, if it's one unit of holiness. In which case, just like it's muktzah on Yom Tov because it wasn't prepared the day before, so too it should be muktzah on Shabbos because it's all considered to be one long day. But if you hold that it's shtei kedushas, if you hold it's two units of holiness, then why shouldn't the egg be mutter on Shabbos since it was prepared from the day before? Therefore, it shouldn't be muktzah, according to Rav, if he holds that it's shtei kedushas. So Amar Rabba hasam mishum hachana. So Rabbi says no, it's not because it's kedusha echas that it's muktzah on Shabbos, but rather because there's a chisaron in the egg's hachana, in the egg's preparation. Detanya v'haya bayom hashishi ve'echinu chol mechen l'Shabbos v'chol mechen l'Yom Tov and Yom Tov mechen l'Shabbos ve'in Shabbos mechina l'Yom Tov. We learn from a pasuk that is discussed by the Mun. When it came to the manna falling in the desert, the Torah says that on Friday they prepared the mun for Shabbos. And what we learn from that pasuk is that just like the Friday in the pasuk is a non-holy day, and only on non-holy days are you allowed to prepare in order to make something non-muktzah on Shabbos, so too, anytime you want to do proper preparation so that an object should be considered to be non-muktzah, it has to be prepared on a non-holy day. This egg was laid on a Yom Tov. So its preparatory day, its day of coming to existence, is on a holy day, not on a Yom Hashishi, not on a day of Chol. And that's the reason why it's muktzah on Shabbos as well, because it lacked the proper hachana. But in Achinami, we grant you that it's shtei kedushos, but it's still going to be muktzah on Shabbos. Now this is a discussion that is well beyond the purview of Eruvin, but just keep it in mind when we get to Maseches Beya. Amar le Abaya. So Abaya now says, I guess he's asking, who was the one that answered this question? Rabba. So Abaya now says to Rabba, Elahad itnan, Kate said, who ose. But let's go back to our Mishnah for a second. We said, what is a person supposed to do? Molicho barishon umachshech alav v'notlo ubalo, basheni machshech alav v'ochlo ubalo. So my question is as follows. We said that on Thursday afternoon, a person can take the food and put it down, and it acts as an ERU for the day of Yom Tov, which is Friday. And then he can also take the same parcel of food that he took home with him after Thursday night, bring it back Friday afternoon, put it down, and then it acts as his ERU for Shabbos. My question is, how are you allowed to do that? The problem that I have is you didn't have proper hachana. This goes back to Alan's question, right? We said, Alan, you had asked this question. You had asked, but what about the fact that there has to be a hachana on a weekday, and the hachana for the eruv that you're making for Shabbos is done on a Yom Tov. It's not being done on a weekday. So the Gemara answers, Amar le Rabba, Misav Resof Hayom Kona Eruv, Tchilas Hayom Kona Eruv, V'Shabbos Mechina La'atzma. So the Gemara answers as follows. You're making a fundamental error in your understanding of the mechanics of an Eruv. When we say that an Eruv is Kona Shvisa for you, it's at what moment is the Eruv mechanism kicking in? It doesn't kick in the moment before Shabbos. It kicks in at the inception of Shabbos. So therefore, the Eruv is not a mechanism that is working on Erev Shabbos to prepare for Shabbos. It's a mechanism that is working on Shabbos to allow me to walk beyond on Shabbos. And therefore, there's no hachana that's necessary from Chol to Shabbos in order for an Eruv to work. That's the answer that the Gemara gives. Now, I just have a side question. We're going to spend literally 60 seconds or less on this question. What about the fact that you have permission to carry the Eruv, the food parcel, on Friday, which is Yom Tov, to the place where you need it to go? What about that problem? Now, we know, for example, are you allowed to carry on Yom Tov?
Yeah, for food.
Are you allowed to unconditionally carry on Yom Tov? No. What are the limitations of carrying on Yom Tov?
Or something you need on Yom Tov.
Something that you need on Yom Tov. Now, if you're telling me that I'm carrying this food in order to allow me to extend my boundaries for Shabbos, what right do I have to carry the food parcel on Yom Tov for tomorrow, for Shabbos? It shouldn't be permitted. This is not a question that the Gemara undertakes. Let me tell you what the practical application of this is. For example, it's Yom Tov today, and I want to carry my talis home because I plan on davening in a different shul tomorrow. Today's Yom Tov, tomorrow Shabbos. I'm going to carry my talis home today so that I can daven at a different shul tomorrow. Am I allowed to do that?
No.
Well, it's not so pashut. It's not so pashut. But l'cha'ora, it should be problematic because I mean, unless you wanted to argue, you're worried the talis is going to get lost, something like that, damaged, then there could be other arguments to make. So why isn't the Gemara worried about that? The Gemara seems to be satisfied with this answer that is not a problem of hachana because there's no hachana being done when you make an eruv. What about the problem of carrying? So I believe, I haven't gone through every single Tosfos on this page, but if you go through the Rishonim, what you'll see is as follows. If you're doing an act on Yom Tov, where it's not self-evident that the act of carrying that you're doing is for tomorrow, one could always tighten it up, one could always interpret your carrying of food to be used on Yom Tov itself. And therefore it's not considered to be problematic, even though when you're carrying it for tomorrow. Okay, so let's go on. The Gemara's question is, Ela me'ata. According to what you've just established, you've just told me that an Eruv kicks in on Shabbos, does not kick in on Erev Shabbos, right? So Ela me'ata ye'arvu bilagin. We saw a couple of days ago, this was Shabbos' DAF, you saw this without me. On Shabbos' DAF it had said that let's say a person has tevel, and he wants to make an Erev Tchumen from this tevel. The problem is that he himself is a Tful Yom, he's still Tameh, and he won't become Tohar until nightfall. And so what he says is that I want this to be considered to be tithe. He takes off a tithe, but he says I don't want the tithe to kick in until Shabbos enters, because if I touch it and it's holy tithe, I'm going to be making it tameh. So he says, I'm just removing some food, I'm designating which part of it is truma, but I'm not making it truma until Shabbos kicks in. So we said over there that it's not a valid eruv. It's not a valid eruv because it wasn't edible, because it was tevel when Shabbos came in. You need it that it's edible even before Shabbos comes in. So the question that we have is, make up your mind. If you're telling me that the mechanism of eruv kicks in only after Shabbos is started or the moment Shabbos starts, then why do you need the food to be edible even before Shabbos? So the Gemara explains, the Gemara simply answers is that even though the mechanism of eruv does not begin until Shabbos starts, But in order for the food for the Eruv to be considered to be valid or kosher food for an Eruv, it has to be edible even from before Shabbos. The Gemara doesn't explain why. We can come up with a number of different svaras as to why that should be, but the bottom line is that the food has to be edible before Shabbos comes in, and if it's not edible before Shabbos comes in, then the mechanism of Eruv will not kick in on Shabbos itself. So now the Gemara says, Elahad ditnan. So what about the following Mishnah? Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Yom Tov asamach l'Shabbos bein mila faneha u bein mila achareha. That whether Yom Tov is on Friday, Yom Tov is on Sunday, ma'ariv adam shnei eruvin, right? A person has to make two eruvs. He's got to make an eruv Thursday. He's got to make an eruv on Friday. Frek the Gemara habo inan seuda haruya midba'o jom v'leka. But what about the problem that you have to have a Suda that's edible from the day before, and here you don't have it? So let me just explain the Gemara's question. Here the Gemara is asking the question that according to Rabbi Eliezer, if you want your Eruv to be in the east on Yontif and in the west on Shabbos, that's perfectly fine. But do you have a problem? Think about it for a second. If I want to extend my Eruv, I have 2,000 Amos to the east and I want to extend it to 4,000 Amos. So by extending it to 4,000, I lose 2,000 in the west. So what I'm going to do Thursday afternoon is I'm going to put one food parcel in the east and say this is for Yontif. I'm going to put another food parcel in the west and say that this is for Shabbos. Now, when Friday afternoon comes around, you're telling me that the Eruv that I want to make for Shabbos has to be edible to me in order for the Eruv to work. Okay? Is that food parcel in the west edible to me? No. It's not, because I have no access to it. Because since on Friday afternoon, my boundary is all the way in the east, I have no access to the food that's in the west because I'm cut off from there, because I've already shifted my boundary all the way to the east. So according to what you've just said, that the food has to be edible to me on Erev Shabbos going into Shabbos, it's not. So how does the Erev work in that case? So the Gemara answers, you're right. The Gemara says, Mi sabris demanachle b'sof alpayim amalakan b'sof alpayim amalakan. Lo, demanachle b'sof elef amalakan b'sof elef amalakan. The answer is that the only way it'll work is not because you want 4,000 amos in the east on Friday and 4,000 amos to the west on Thursday. No, you only want 3,000 amos to the east on Friday, and you want 3,000 amos to the west on Shabbos. So you have an intersecting leeway of 1,000 amos in each direction. Think about it, because what are you going to do? You're going to make your Eruv in the east at the 1,000 amma mark, which gives you an additional 2,000 amos from that parcel of food. When you shift over only 1,000 amos, you still have 1,000 amos in the west, because you only shifted 1,000 amos over to the east. And that way, when you put your food parcel in the west at the 1,000 amma point, it's still accessible to you. So therefore, you shifted it from here to here. The food is in the west over here. It's still accessible to you, and therefore the Eruv will work in both directions.
Can you use a family member?
Shliach.
You have to use a shliach to put down the food.
No, I'm saying to eat it. In other words, can you say one family member would go there, one family member would go
No. Let's not confuse the issue. We're talking about one person over here. Correct the Gemara. Elahada Amar Rav Yehuda. Irev b'raglav yom rishon ma'arif b'raglav yom sheni. Irev b'pas b'yom rishon ma'arif b'pas b'yom sheni. Ha'kamechin miyom tov l'Shabbos. The way the Rashi understands this question is as follows. I have another question. You're telling me that you're not allowed to prepare on Yom Tov for Shabbos. I have a problem. Are you allowed to make an Erev with your feet without any food at all? Sure. What do? You go over to the place where you want to be kind of shvisa, and you say, Ich bin da. This is my domain for Shabbos. This is going to be my domain for Shabbos. Now, when do you make that declaration? You make it on Erev Shabbos. If you're making that declaration on Erev Shabbos, it turns out that you're doing hachana on Yom Tov for Shabbos by going over there and making that declaration. So the Gemara says, Amar lei mi sabris da'azul v'amar midi, da'azul v'shasik v'yasiv. The Gemara says, who says that you have to make a declaration? Just walk over to the place where you want to be Kona Shvisa on Friday afternoon and sit down and say nothing. and you'll be automatically be kind of shvisa. So the Gemara now says, Kiman, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, Damar Cheptzei Hefker Kohen Shvisa. This must go like Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, because Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says that even inanimate objects acquire domain. Even though they have no intelligence and they have no declarative ability, they can be kind of shvisa for themselves just by being there. And so too, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says, if you're shluffing in a place, if you just fall asleep in a place without making any declaration, you're automatically going to be kind of shvisa. And therefore here too, if you just sit down and say nothing, you're going to be kind of shvisa. So the Gemara says, no, not necessarily. Afilu tema rabbanan akan lo pligi rabbanan leid Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri ela biyashen de lo matzi omar. Avo b'neir di boy lememar matzi omar afal gavdelo omar commando omar dami. The Gemara says, no, even the Rabbanan who disagree with Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri and say that a sleeping person is not koine shvisa, that's only because at that moment he's unconscious, he has no awareness of where he is, and therefore he's unable to make a declaration of being koine shvisa. But if a person is completely awake and aware, then even the Rabbanan would agree that without him making a declaration, he's koine shvisa as long as he mentally wants to be koine shvisa. And therefore the solution is, you're not, even though granted, you're not allowed to prepare on Yontif for Shabbos, so you can't even say things. Because like remember the Torah, the Pasuk in Yirmiyah says, you're not even allowed to speak on Yontif or Shabbos in a way that's going to prepare for tomorrow. Granted, you're not allowed to say, I want to be Kona Shvisa, but just go to the place, sit down, have intent, and you'll be Kona Shvisa. So the Gemara says, Amalei Rabba bar Rav Chanan le Abaya. Rabba bar Rav Chanan says to Abaya, and I think this is still old part of Rabba's statement, I have a shemiya le lamar hadetanya lo yahalech adam l'sof sadei leida mahitzricha kayotze ba lo yitayel adam al Pesach Medina kedei sheyikanes lamerchatz miyad hadarbe. He says, if the master would have heard the following brisa, the brisa says that a person is not allowed to walk to the edge of his field on Shabbos to look out at the plants that are growing on his field. He's not allowed to do that because it looks like you're preparing for what you need to do, the cultivation of the field for after Shabbos. Similarly, a person is not allowed to walk out to the edge of the city if the bathhouse is right across the street, because it's clearly indicated in that case that the purpose why you're walking to the edge of the city is because you're waiting just a second after Shabbos, you want to run into the bath. Those things you're not allowed to do. And even though those are non-verbal actions, you're not even allowed to do non-verbal acts of hachana on Shabbos for Chol or on Yontif for Shabbos. And therefore you wouldn't agree, you would retract that statement. Rabbi would retract that statement that it's permissible to go and sit down without saying anything, that's okay. So the Gemara says, Velohi, Shamiya le velo hadarbeit. But that's not true, says the Gemara, because Rabban was aware of that brisa, and he still holds that this case is different. You know why? Because Hasa mukhamilsa, hachalav mukhamilsa. He says, and over there, it's indicated by your behavior that you're preparing on Shabbos for Chol. Here, when you walk out to the edge of the city, it's not clearly indicated that that's your objective to make an Eruv. Because Itzur v'merabananhu, amrinan shmaita mashchase, v'i am haaretzu, amrinan chamra irkasle. Why? Because very often people like to walk outside the city. They want to take a shpatzir, they want to take a stroll. For a Talmud Chacham often takes a stroll because he's deeply engrossed in Talmudic thought, and he puts his hands behind his back and goes for a stroll and starts thinking pensively and just ends up walking outside the city. So it's not clearly indicated that you're doing it for making an Eruv. And even if you're not literate, even if you're an Am Haaretz, a lot of times people walk outside the city because they lost their donkey and they need to go see what happened to my donkey. So it's not clearly indicated by walking outside the city that you're going to be Konesh Visa for Shabbos. And that's why it's not a problem of Hachana, because it's not clearly indicated. In the previous cases where you're walking to the edge of your garden, that's the only reason why you're going there. When you're going to the edge of the city, that's the only reason you're going there, to go to the Merchatz afterwards. That's why it's usher. We talk a paskin this way in Shulchan Aruch. It says that, let's say you have a vegetable patch growing in the back of in your backyard. You have a vegetable patch, you got your peppers and your tomatoes, and you're so excited because you love growing stuff. Are you allowed to look at them growing on Shabbos to see, I need to put more water, I need to put more nutrients? So it depends. If people, when they look at you, could say, oh, he just wants to take a spazier in his backyard, so then it's okay. But if you crawl down on all fours and start, take a magnifying glass and start examining the tomatoes and look at the bugs that are eating it, so then that's usher on Shabbos, even though you're not doing anything.